Hi there. Well, today I am going to do a version of a lesson that I learned from a man named Carl Sagan that he showed on PBS back in the 80s. It may have been Nova, if I remember the Nova program. Anyway, so he taught about a concept that he called flatland, and it had come from a different physicist before him, but he did a really good job of teaching it. You could probably look up on YouTube or something. Carl Sagan teaches flatland or something along those lines, and check that out. He did a good job of explaining all sorts of scientific things, and it would be if you're interested in what I do here today, you'd be interested to see what he has to say too. So you're going to get my version of flatland. My purpose in describing this isn't to necessarily take some kind of dive into theoretical physics or something like that, which I'm not a theoretical physicist, so I don't really know much about it. But this is about perception, about how human beings can maybe change their perception or augment their perceptions, or that all of us can understand that there's different perceptions to have, and that if we can somehow in our own way figure out how to take a step farther back, or farther out, I should say, where to gain a perspective that we would have never even imagined before, especially when it comes to how we relate to others, or how we relate to humanity, or just everything in our life. So, all right, the tool that I'll be using today in my teaching of flatland is the ubiquitous paper towel. In this case, the paper towel roll. Okay, so I'm going to talk about, I guess, maybe before I even bring out that roll, I'm going to talk about what I refer to as a first dimensional person. So we're going to imagine here that a first dimensional person is just this little piece of paper towel. Okay, so I think you can see it there, just that dot. So the first dimension is a point that has neither height nor width nor length. That's not actually really possible, but you just have to kind of try to imagine that there's a point. Sometimes on a graph, we just call it a point, no height, no length, no width. And this is a person that lives in no dimensions, okay? And just hanging out. Now, a person who lives in no dimensions is only in one spot. They can't move in any direction. They can't perceive in any direction. They can't imagine anything outside of just point. I would imagine it'd be a very boring lifestyle, but we're doing our best to imagine this, that the 0th dimension, the non-dimension, but a person living in it is literally just suspended, if you will. Well, if there were more than one 0th person, well, here's another one. If they were right next to the first 0th person, here we are with our second 0th person. They're right next to him, so to speak, but since neither one can perceive outside of the 0th dimension, they don't see each other, they don't hear each other, it's outside of their ability to even begin to comprehend that there's somebody right next to them. You could put them really close, doesn't matter. Neither one can perceive outside of right where they are. this first dimensional person and that first dimensional person could remain next to each other for all of eternity. Neither one would know. Okay, so they're just stuck. Now, let's say, and they can't really interact with each other either. In a bizarre way, if somehow both people ended up in the same point, which I can't even really demonstrate here, but like if I mush them together, then you could say that both of the 0th dimension people are in the same place. Within the same 0th dimension, they might be able to somehow get a sense of the other 0th dimensional being. Even though all this is impossible, just try to imagine that. Okay, but we're not going to hang out there for very long. We're going to leave that scenario to this other scenario. Imagine that somehow the the first dimension got settled onto one of these guys right here, this one. So the 0th dimension somehow got lifted into the first dimension. Well, this paper towel tube, we're going to call the first dimension. It's actually impossible, as I've said before, but we're just going to try to imagine it. The first dimension is only length. So imagine a big straw, big tube. It goes forever in both directions, but has no width and no height, only length. So that line, that tube, goes on forever. It's like a first dimension universe. And on that first dimension universe, there's a planet, first dimensional planet, which is basically the length of this paper towel holder, rod thing that is in a tube that keeps going forever in all directions. And some magical first dimensional being does this. Bonk. So now the 0th dimensional person, we'll do it like this, gets moved, gets plunged into this first dimension. So he's in there. And he doesn't just get lifted, moved into the first dimension. His perception, his ability to perceive now gets moved too. He can suddenly see this way and that way. What? There's an entire universe I had no idea of. Okay, well, now let's imagine that he can move back and forth in the size of this paper towel. If he goes to the edges of it, he's outside of his first dimensional world now. The first dimensional universe keeps going, but he's outside with him. So that's his limits. He can get a little weird first dimensional telescope and look that direction and see forever and like, whoa, this is limitless. This person could be in his own first dimensional world as well. The two of them would never know. It's like two straws running parallel forever, and the entire universe has no idea that the other entire universe exists. Nice. Okay, now let's put first dimension aside, because we're going to just get our minds blown and imagine something so outlandish that these two little guys it's just beyond them. Second dimension. What? So second dimension is width and length. That's all. So imagine a plane. Here, this desk here. Imagine that this desk goes forever in the four directions. Forever long, forever wide. It's a plane. And this first dimensional person got taken out of this 0th dimensional person got taken out of their first dimensional world, and they're at the well, they haven't quite been taken out of the first dimensional world. They're at the cusp of entering into something that's just really going to blow their mind. But before we do that, before we talk about that, I'm going to put the first the 0th dimensional person to the side, and the first dimension to the side. And we're going to now go to the second dimensional universe. Now imagine this table is a second dimensional world. The second dimension universe keeps going on and on forever, but the edges of this desk is the second dimensional world. And I'm going to introduce, I don't know, Phil, Derek, James. I'll probably forget those names, but anyway. 3 second dimensional people on this second dimensional planet. So imagine that these little pieces of paper towel are actually mushed into the fabric of this table. Well, this is leather here, but they're like mushed into it so that they're inside this thing that has no height, only width, only length. They can see each other. So Phil can scoot over and say, "Hey, Derek, how are you doing?" "Pretty good." "James, come on over." "Hey, how are you?" And they're having a conversation with each other. But they were taught by someone, a wizard, that there's these little beings that are just silly, and they can only perceive, normally they can only perceive just in a point. But some of them are enlightened, and they've been able to perceive in basically a tube in just the first dimension. And so these 3 guys are like, well, I want to talk to this person. And so rather than having this big paper towel here, what we're going to do is imagine that there's a straw that's running right here. And Johnny is inside that straw. He's running back and forth. Woohoo! Oh my gosh, this is amazing. I can see both directions, and I have a little telescope. I can see forever that way. It's blowing my mind. I'm a 0 dimension person, but now I'm in the first dimension, and I'm, well, yeah. And he's going back and forth like that. Well, these 3 get right up close to him. They're going to tease him a little bit. He's going, whoo-hoo, 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 and he doesn't perceive anything. There's no people. There's his telescope I mentioned earlier, but there's nobody around. He's just walking back and forth in this little single dimension, one-dimensional world and looking in his telescope out into the one-dimension forever land. And for him, it is limitlessly expansive, both of these directions. Well, these guys come up, and they get right up next to him, literally like right up next to him. And they yell, "Hey, Johnny, how you doing?" And he doesn't even know they're there. He doesn't hear because they're not in his first dimension. They haven't scooted over into that tube. They're or kind of in the same space as the tube yet. Because the tube is just one little piece of length inside of their second dimensional length and width. So he's running back and forth, and they're yelling, "Ha ha!" And he just doesn't even know they exist, and they just think that's the greatest thing. Like, we can sit here and yell at him all day, blah, blah. And then James here goes, "Okay, guys, okay. This is going to blow his mind, okay? Are you ready? You ready to watch this?" So this little guy, Johnny's walking this way. As he's walking this way, I don't know, James, he scoots over into that dimensional tube. Now, the edges of him are going out farther than just that line. But little Johnny here turns around to walk back that direction, and he sees just the piece of James that exists in that first dimension. He doesn't see the rest of him. And so who knows exactly what that would look like? You know, he just sees Johnny is this whole big wide thing, and he just sees this one little speck. And he's like, "What's that? What are you?" And James, you know, his buddies are listening. James goes, "I am a second dimensional being." And little Johnny's like, "Ah, where did you come from?" "The other, somewhere mysterious." "Ah!" And then he winks over at these 2 and goes, "Whoop," just scoots over. For him, he's just scooting to the side. But for Johnny, the thing just disappeared entirely. And so then he goes like this, whoop, 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 whoop. And what does little Johnny see? Just these mysterious things moving back and forth. And if he goes, oh, as he goes across that line, then little Johnny's like in silence, and then he's in silence again. And he saw this thing while this sound was happening. So all three of the guys, they kind of get into it. Whoop, hit, huh, and then, freaking the poor guy out. Well, what they don't know is that there's this whole other dimension. We're going to let poor Johnny go live his life over here as a 0th dimensional person in the first dimension. He's so spazzed out about the whole experience, he might just decide to go back and just live in the 0th dimension. Forget first dimension crap. It's too scary. Anyway, they're over there. So these three, they're over here giggling with each other. That was kind of fun. Yeah, it sure was. And then, they go for a walk and whatnot. What they don't know is that here am I. I am a 3rd dimensional being. Now, being a 3rd dimensional being, I can perceive in 3rd dimension. These are 2nd dimensional little beings. They can't perceive. Not only are they in the 2nd dimension, their whole ability to perceive is 2nd dimensional. So they totally get how they can screw around with 1st dimension person, but a dimension higher than theirs, that's gonna be pretty funky when now I start messing with them. But before I do that, we're going to talk a little bit more about these three guys. They have sides. One walks around the other one. They can see that they have sides. They might even go over and poke them. It's solid. For when they interact with each other, they're very solid things. Because in their perception, they don't have this top that you and I can clearly see. So if they go and touch each other or wander around each other, that's the solid, hard, real aspect of each other. Right on. Now, they're talking, everything's good, and they decide to go to bed for the evening. So all of them go home. Well, we're going to bring a house into the picture. This is James's house. All right. Paper towel, little square. We're going to set it down. Yay. So this is his house. He's come to his house. La, 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 da, 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 da. Opens the door. This direction. Slides up. He comes in. Yay. Okay. He's in his house. Goes over here to the corner of this house. Now, in his perception, he is inside a thing that is 100% solid. He walks around, touches the walls. He locked the door. There's no way that anything can come from the top and go in or come from the bottom and go in, as far as he knows. As far as he can imagine, because he's a 2nd dimensional person. So this 2nd dimensional house that has no floor and no ceiling is all that's needed in his mind. If one of his friends comes over and his door is locked, they can't get in. They can't get in. Okay, everything is blocked. But something nightmarish happens. Me, 3rd dimensional person, I decide to do this. And I just entered. All I did was touch just the flatness of my finger and back out again. Now, if I hover my finger right over the leather here, the paper towel here, right over James, he has no idea I'm there. But if I touch my finger, boo, suddenly He's facing that direction in a completely solid building, and something that looks like the edge of a fingerprint. If you walked around it, you could kind of see the edges of a fingerprint. You wouldn't even know you can't even perceive what that thing would look like to go under it or above it and see the fingerprint, just the edges of it. So I go, for him, something appeared and disappeared. For me, the third dimensional being, I'm just moving. I'm not appearing and disappearing. I'm just entering and exiting this second dimension. But for me, it's not entering and exiting it. For him, it is. So now I could move over and put my finger down behind him. We were here. Bleep, boop, bleep, boop. For him, things are appearing and disappearing. Now, if my finger here could make noise, or if I get my mouth down there and go, and the noise-making apparatus also enters that second dimension, then he would now hear noise that he wasn't hearing. I could have a bullhorn here at billions of decibels and be hovering just above it and pushing that bullhorn, and he won't hear it. If I barely dip onto the surface of this table, which is the equivalent of entering his little second dimension, then it would be like this sudden, horrifying noise that suddenly appeared, and then I could make it go away again by just moving back up. So a third dimensional being can mess around with a second dimensional being all day. Now, let's say that happened. He just got, teased by 2 or 3 third dimensional beings. So the next morning, he's kind of tired and feels like this was a nightmare. Was it a dream? I don't know. Anyway, so the next morning he leaves his house and he runs over to his friends, or let's say his friends come over to his house, and he says to them, okay, you're not going to believe this. And he just explains this thing appearing, leaving, noise appearing, leaving. And they're like, you're weird. That's not possible. So he's like, okay, you're probably right. And they shun him a little bit, because he's being superstitious or whatever. They go away. Well, it's nighttime again. He goes into his house again. And then the being who is third dimensional, who is so outside of his ability to comprehend in his current state, he can't even imagine this coming. What's coming? The third dimensional person, me in this case, I lift him out of his second dimension. And all of a sudden, he sees that camera. He sees this microphone. He sees lights. He sees the wall. He sees things he could never imagine before. But that's not even the whole point. He sees in a way he never could have imagined he could do before. It's a second dimensional person in the third dimension now. So even though he doesn't have any height and width, he's in a realm that even though he only has width and length and no height, he's in a realm that has height. So his perceptions have changed now, and his perceptions have height too. And so he realizes kind of all at the same time that my house is not solid at all. Like it's see-through. What? And he also realizes that he's oddly see-through. And he looks around, and he knew that his world back down here in the second dimension, his universe, went on forever. He has a little second dimensional telescope that just looks forever in across length and width. But he never knew, boom, the whole height thing. No telescope that he could ever imagine could ever look into height. Oh, so here he is looking around, seeing now the things that were kind of messing with him. And then he floats over. His buddies are walking around town, and he's floating. Or we could also say I'm just kind of moving him around. Anyway, let's say he's floating under his own reconnaissance. He floats over and looks inside his friends. Oh, my gosh. That's not, it's blowing in everything is blowing his mind. But this one is like, how is it I can see inside my friends? Because when I'm in the dimension with them, they're solid. But apparently they're not. I guess I can be seen inside by higher beings all the time. Then, he's feeling a little spunky. He's going to mess with his friends. So there they are. And he goes like this. Hi! And they, you disappeared. Yep. Bye-bye. Boink. He disappears. They're like, what? What? Then he goes, ha, mwaha, mwaha, mwaha. Now he's just moving. He knows now. He gets it. I'm just moving. To them, he's appearing and disappearing, appearing and disappearing. Now, if he went like this, it kind of landed right on, quote unquote, one of them. Their impression of this, and him too, I guess, would be, James is sort of in me. Kind of. I don't really understand what's going on. And then he comes back into height, and they're not experiencing that anymore. And they're like, that was weird. And then he just sort of decides to land and stay there. And they freak out. And when they're done freaking out, he goes, guys, let me explain this. And he tries to explain the third dimension. And these two are like, yeah, you're clearly, we need to get some second dimension medications for you, pal. And he's like, no, you don't understand. If it's this it's up or down. It's up and down. Like, are those words you're saying? It's like if you were to go up. What's up? What do you mean up? What word is that? Well, okay, fine, down. If you go down, then you can see things. What are you talking about, James? What is up? What is down? We don't get it. That's true. I guess if you don't have the experience, you wouldn't get it. Sorry, guys. I have to apologize for that, I guess. But it's really cool. And I know that it's a thing. I know it's real. I mean, in this universe, you can see, and he describes some things. And they were like, well, it's not the sort of thing you can prove, I guess. Well, no, I can't prove it. The only way I could prove it, I guess, if I don't know, if I go up or down. So he decides to go up or down, whichever. Now he disappears. They're like, well, okay, so he can do tricky stuff, but all that stuff he was talking about, there's no proof that it could ever exist. So no, we're not gonna buy that. Until one day the third dimensional person grabs those two and they have their experience. And then now these three people, three witnesses, if you will, they wander around trying to tell all the other second dimensional people, or flatlanders, as we call them, you're never going to believe this. There's this whole other, it's called up or down. And when you go there, it's like this and that and the other. And maybe since there's three of them, maybe a couple people believe them. Maybe not. So what scientists call the fourth dimension is height, width, length, and time. I've decided I don't understand time very well, but time and space are related. And if you can manipulate space, then you have at the same time manipulated time. And if you can move a certain speed, then time becomes in essence non-existent. But that's probably another discussion. How there's a lot of movies that describe this, and physicists have described this concept of the fourth dimension is kind of like having a piece of paper. Imagine that's a plane, like we described before. It represents space. And if you're a little ant, you can walk across this piece of paper, and that's walking third dimensionally from one point to another. But if you were to be able to bend said paper, bend space-time, and then go that direction, then in one step, you've gone that entire distance as opposed to walking all the way across. So that's a fourth dimensional move. Now, again, fourth dimension has never been sufficiently, in my opinion, sufficiently described by anybody. Why is that? Well, because we can't comprehend it. We can sort of wrap our head around it, maybe imaginationally, just like when James described him to the other Flatlanders, and they kind of go, "I think I can imagine height." But they're never going to get there. He could only sort of describe, even he himself being there could still only go back into the second dimension and describe it sort of peripherally, describe aspects of it that would never really reach an exact definition of it. And we can talk about this ant and the piece of paper. Well, imagine that here's time/space, and rather than doing just that one fold, and the ant is over here, and we could fold once and you could step, and now you just made that. Well, imagine taking that same piece of paper and folding it multiple times. And then folding it again, and then folding it again, and then moving that way across it. Well, you would go in and out of multiple aspects of what you think is a universe almost simultaneously. And if you were to smash this down, and you could step back and forth in there. Let's imagine you had an entire book, the pages of which are all second dimensional universes. All of these second dimensional universes are right next to each other, but they would never know it. So you've got James here and Philip here and Joey here. They're all Flatlanders in their own flat land. And it's a book that goes on forever. And the pages go on forever, but they don't go up or down. They just go sideways forever. If it's a 1,000-page book, it's 1,000 second dimensions that never perceive the other one. But then if somebody were to be able to travel that way, we're not talking about now being in the same universe, but be able to travel across it really quickly. We're now talking about 1,000 universes, 1,000, a billion different pieces of paper that are now being traveled through. Then that is a third dimensional being being able to comprehend countless concourses of second dimensions simultaneously, if you can look through it. And if you can imagine a third dimensional being that can comprehend the third dimension, a fourth dimensional being can easily comprehend the fourth dimension. If you're a 30th dimensional being, you can comprehend things in such a way where all things are happening at the same time. All things are present at the same time. If you're an omniscient multidimensional being, then us poor little third dimensioners would have no idea how they could do what they do and actually even why they do it. Assuming that there might be something like that. Some of the things that have been observed in our universe by physicists are not observable, are not able to be observed mathematically unless you can take into account other dimensions. And so that's where this multiverse thing comes from, that there's got to be, in order for string theory to be correct, and the reason why it's a theory at all is because there are certain things that we have been able to observe now in subatomic particles in our own universe. The only way that could be is if something greater than our comprehension is also involved in it. And then mathematically, they came up with multiple universes that could interact in such a way that we get the phenomenon that we see. And then the multiverse kind of spun out of that. So, in life, sometimes we have pain, sometimes we have anger, sometimes we have sorrow, sometimes we blame other people, sometimes we're hurt. Wouldn't it be amazing that regardless of what another human being did, we could still maintain equanimity in our heart? Where we're like unoffendable, unassailable as well. Like we, regardless of what's going on, we can try to lift ourselves up into a dimension where we can see things absolutely clearly and be at peace. You hear stories of monks or whatever that live up on a mountain and they come back and say, well, in my meditations, these are some of the things that I've learned. Well, do they touch a dimension that's different than our own in order to be able to come back and say that? And then you just got normal old people, moms that are exhausted because they've got a little baby and whatnot. And so there's this daughter or a younger woman who come and say, I don't want to have a baby. That's exhausting. I don't even know how you do that. And then the mom says something like, well, the love that you feel, the reward that you get makes it all worth it. And it's not going to be comprehensible to the other person until they allow themselves to try to enter that same dimension of feeling and thought that cannot be captured entirely with words. There's a Taoist idea in the Tao Te Ching, basically says the Tao is unexplainable, but there's manifestations of it that happen all the time in simple daily events, and those are observable. And so the observable and the unobservable together are the same thing. It's just they're just manifest differently. So I invite myself and everybody else to try to come to know that an unknowable thing. And over time, life can get better and better.